It began subtly, the way most insidious things do. A whisper in the static, a fleeting shadow in the periphery, a faint scent of ozone and decay that clung to the air like a shroud. It started in the silence, not the peaceful, comforting kind, but a silence that pressed, a silence that had weight, a silence that listened. My name is Elias Thorne, and I am a sound engineer, or rather, I was. My specialty was capturing the unheard, the subtle nuances that lie beneath the threshold of human perception. I worked with research institutions, film studios, even the military, recording everything from the infrasonic groans of tectonic plates to the ultrasonic squeals of bats. I believed that the universe spoke in a language beyond words, a symphony of frequencies that held the secrets of existence. I was obsessed with capturing every note. My downfall began with a commission from a clandestine organization known only as the Institute of Eschatological Studies. Their name alone sent a shiver down my spine, a premonition of the horrors to come. They sought to record the silence before creation, the void that preceded the Big Bang, the nothingness from which all things sprang. They believed that within this primordial silence lay the key to understanding the universe's ultimate fate, its end. The Institute provided me with equipment unlike anything I had ever seen. Devices fabricated from exotic materials, humming with an unnatural energy. They spoke of capturing not just sound, but the very fabric of reality, of recording the absence of existence itself. I was to travel to a remote location in the Atacama Desert, a place where the silence was said to be so profound that it bordered on the unreal, a place where the veil between dimensions was thin. The Atacama was a desolate expanse of salt flats and towering sand dunes, a landscape bleached white under the relentless sun. The silence there was indeed unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was not simply the absence of sound, but a presence, a palpable entity that pressed against my eardrums, a void that seemed to absorb all sound and light. The Institute's team set up their equipment in a crumbling adobe structure, a relic of some forgotten civilization, and I began my recordings. In the beginning, there was nothing, just the hiss of the equipment and the faint whisper of the wind. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice subtle anomalies in the recordings, faint rhythmic pulses that defied explanation, whispers that seemed to emerge from the silence itself, not picked up by any microphone, but sensed by the very core of my being. They were like echoes from a place beyond human comprehension, a realm of absolute nothingness that somehow resonated with a dark and terrifying sentience. The Institute's researchers grew increasingly agitated. They spoke of the listener, an entity that resided within the primordial silence, an entity that was aware of our attempts to probe its domain. They claimed that I had inadvertently opened a doorway, a conduit between our reality and the void, and that the listener was now aware of us, listening to us, learning about us. The changes began subtly. The equipment started malfunctioning, emitting strange, discordant sounds. The researchers became withdrawn, paranoid, whispering amongst themselves in hushed tones. I started experiencing vivid nightmares, dreams of a vast, empty expanse filled with an oppressive silence, a silence that pulsed with a malevolent intelligence. In my dreams, I heard a voice, not through my ears but within my mind, a voice that spoke in a language I did not understand yet somehow comprehended on a primal level. It spoke of hunger, of a desire to consume, to absorb all of existence back into the void. One night I awoke to find the other researchers gone. Their equipment was abandoned, their notes scattered across the floor. On one page, a single sentence was scrawled in a frantic hand. "It knows we're here. It's coming." Panic seized me. I tried to contact the outside world, but the satellite phone was dead. The silence of the desert seemed to intensify, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I realized that I was alone, utterly alone, in a place where the boundary between reality and nothingness was dissolving. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that something was coming for me, something ancient and vast and hungry. The silence was no longer empty, it was alive, sentient, and it was watching me. I could feel its gaze, a cold, predatory awareness that penetrated my very soul. I was no longer an observer, but the observed. The hunter had become the hunted. Days blurred into a nightmare of escalating terror. The adobe structure, once a refuge, became a prison. The walls seemed to breathe, to pulse with the same rhythmic beat I had detected in the recordings. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, taking on vaguely humanoid shapes, mimicking my movie, immense, mocking me. The faint scent of ozone and decay grew stronger, filling the air, making it difficult to breathe. My equipment, once a tool of discovery, had become a conduit for the horrors of the void. The recordings, when played back, were no longer silent. They were filled with a cacophony of whispers, groans and screams, sounds that seemed to emanate not from the physical world, but from the depths of some unimaginable hellscape. And through it all, I could hear the voice from my dreams growing louder, clearer, closer. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that it was all a hallucination, a product of stress and isolation. But deep down, I knew it was real. The Institute had warned me. They had spoken of the dangers of tampering with the fundamental fabric of reality, of the consequences of peering into the abyss. Now, I was living those consequences. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows across the desert, I saw it. A figure emerging from the dunes, a silhouette against the dying light. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long and thin, its head a featureless void. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the sand, its feet leaving no footprints. It was the listener, the entity from the void, and it was coming for me. I retreated into the adobe structure, barricading the door with whatever I could find. But I knew it was futile. This was no ordinary creature, no physical being that could be kept out by walls and doors. It was a manifestation of the void itself, a being of pure nothingness, and it could seep through any barrier, penetrate any defense. The silence outside intensified, pressing against the walls of the structure, making the adobe creak and groan. The air grew colder, the scent of ozone and decay overpowering. I huddled in a corner, clutching a rusty crowbar, my only weapon against the unimaginable horror that awaited me. Then the silence broke. A sound unlike anything I had ever heard echoed through the structure. It was a low, guttural groan, a sound that seemed to resonate from the very depths of the earth. It was the sound of the void, the sound of nothingness made audible, and it was terrifying. The walls of the structure began to dissolve, the adobe crumbling into dust, revealing the vast, empty expanse of the desert beyond. The figure, the listener, stood before me, its featureless head tilted in what I could only interpret as curiosity. It reached out a long, skeletal hand, its fingers ending in points of pure darkness, and I knew that my time had come. The listener's touch was not a physical sensation, but an experience that transcended the physical realm. It was a feeling of absolute emptiness, of being stripped of all sensation, all thought, all identity. It was like being erased, not just from the physical world, but from existence itself. I screamed, but no sound escaped my lips. My voice, my very being, was being absorbed into the void. The world around me dissolved, the desert, the adobe structure. the sky all fading into a featureless expanse of grey. I was falling, not through space, but through nothingness. There was no up, no down, no direction, only an infinite void that stretched in all directions. I was no longer Elias Thorne, sound engineer, but a disembodied consciousness, a fragment of awareness adrift in a sea of nothing. Then I saw them. Shapes, faint and indistinct at first, then gradually taking form. They were humanoid, but distorted, their bodies elongated and twisted, their faces blank and featureless. They were the echoes of those who had come before me, the researchers, the institute members, all those who had dared to peer into the void and had been consumed by it. They surrounded me, their empty eyes fixed on me, their silent mouths agape in soundless screams. They reached out to me, their skeletal fingers grazing my essence, threatening to pull me further into the void, to obliterate me completely. But then I heard it. A faint sound, a whisper in the nothingness. It was a human voice, distant and distorted but familiar. It was my own voice, a recording from my earlier experiments before the listener had arrived, before the world had unraveled. The sound, my own voice, seemed to hold the void at bay. It was a reminder of my humanity, a tether to the world I had lost. It was an anchor in the sea of nothingness. I focused on the sound, clinging to it as if it were a lifeline. I replayed the recording in my mind, over and over, each repetition strengthening its power, pushing back the encroaching void. The echoes, the consumed souls, recoiled from the sound. They seemed to be in pain, their silent, the void, the opposite of nothingness. It was the essence of existence, of creation, of life itself. With newfound determination, I began to create sound within my mind. I hummed, I sang, I recited poetry, I recounted memories. I filled the void with the sounds of my life, my experiences, my emotions. The echoes recoiled further, their forms flickering and dissolving. The void continued to shrink, its power waning in the face of the sounds I created. And then I saw it. A point of light in the distance, a tiny spark of existence in the vast emptiness. It was a way out, a path back to reality. Guided by the sound, I moved towards the light, leaving the echoes and the void behind. I swam through the nothingness, propelled by the sounds of my own creation, until finally I reached the light. I awoke with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I was lying on the cold, hard floor of the adobe structure in the Atacama Desert. The sun was shining through a crack in the wall, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. At first, I thought it had all been a dream, a nightmare brought on by stress and isolation. But as I looked around, I saw the signs of the horror I had experienced. The equipment was smashed, the notes were scattered, and the air still carried the faint scent of ozone and decay. I stumbled outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. The desert was silent, but it was no longer the oppressive silence of the listener. It was a natural silence, the silence of a world that was still intact, a world that I had somehow managed to return to. I was found a few days later by a group of nomadic herders. They took me to a nearby town where I was treated for dehydration and exhaustion. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they dismissed it as the ravings of a madman. I eventually made my way back to civilization, but I was a changed man. The experience in the Atacama had left an indelible mark on my soul. I was haunted by the memory of the void, by the echoes of the consumed souls, by the knowledge that something ancient and malevolent lurked beyond the veil of reality. I abandoned my career as a sound engineer. I could no longer bear to listen to the subtle nuances of the world, knowing that they were merely a thin veneer over the terrifying silence that lay beneath. I now live a quiet life, far from any major city, far from any place where the silence might become too profound. I avoid dark, quiet places, and I always keep a radio playing, a constant stream of sound to ward off the encroaching void. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is still, I hear it. A faint whisper in the static, a subtle shift in the silence. It is the echo of the listener, a reminder that the void is still out there, waiting, listening. And I know that one day it will return. It will find me again, and this time there may be no escape. The silence will consume me, and I will become another echo in the void, forever lost in the nothingness from which all things came, and to which all things must eventually return. This then is my warning. Be wary of the silence. Be wary of what lies beyond the threshold of human perception. For in the silence, in the nothingness, there is something that listens, something that waits, something that hungers. And when it comes, when the silence finally consumes you, remember my story. Remember the echo of silence and pray that it does not become your own.